I still spend a lot of time outdoors. And that really translated early on for me into internships during high school, environmental education. I was working in an environmental ed center that had a lot of kids who came there from, I was living in California, so a lot of inner city youth who came and had sort of this connection to nature fostered there that maybe they didn't have in their daily lives. And I found that really impactful. And I thought a lot about how even the campus that we were teaching on and the buildings we were teaching in and the kinds of resources we had helped to foster that connection for the kids who came through there. So I became really interested in sort of this idea of buildings as teachers and buildings as models for teaching us how to have a new relationship with nature and the natural world. And so well, I think a lot of us think of sustainable architecture as like how can we save the most energy and how can we do that almost invisibly so that it feels like the same building. I'm really interested in how does sustainable building actually mean a new relationship between you and buildings and then by extension a new relationship between you and nature. And so that became something I was really interested in, through undergrad and especially in my graduate studies at Yale, where my capstone project was basically based on this idea of eco-empathy. How can we foster empathy for natural processes, other species, through the way that we design our buildings? And so that's a thread that has been sort of consistent more broadly. But at the same time, as an environmentalist and someone who's been very committed to all these causes since I was little, really thinking about how can we really reduce the impact of buildings, but also tell the story of how we're doing that in a way that's compelling and that touches more people than just those of us who have these biospheric values, but people who have other value orientations, but could still benefit from all the amazing things that green buildings accomplish for them.
That's really interesting. I'm interested to hear you, I guess, talk a little more about maybe some of the ways that you foster this connection between human and the environment and get them, I guess, to empathize with the natural world through the way they interact with buildings. Are there any examples that you might be able to give for how that framework can be implemented?
Sure. I mean, I think biophilic design is a really big one that I'm sure many people on this call have heard about. But thinking about how do we take patterns, elements from nature and incorporate them into buildings. One thing that I've been very involved in, both in my design work and also in my teaching, because the class I teach is actually on architectural ornament and how we use detail in architecture to connect back to the natural world. And so thinking about how we might take elements that we see in nature and bring them into buildings, I think it is really key. One very simple example is pattern on a project I did with Centerbrook that I'm very proud of, the Mill River Whittingham Discovery Center in Stanford in Mill River Park, which some of you may have seen or been to, has this really cool set of aluminum panels that have this custom pattern that I designed that sort of has these elements of growth and sort of abundance, I think, that draw people in and make them feel it sort of as a screen between the inside of the building and the park outside and sort of serves to mediate that. So that's one example of something more abstract. More specifically, I'm also really interested in how do we tell the story of what a building is doing. So I've been involved in a number of projects at Centerbrook and now here at Yale. And how do we actually connect people to the functions of the building through signage and storytelling? So I've been working with a social psychologist at University of Wisconsin and her partner at University of Colorado, who have been developing a framework for sustainable building signage in order to develop more effective signage in green buildings. So one example is at New Library, which is a Centerbrook project that was completed about a year and a half ago, where we designed a system of custom signs that go beyond just the usual banal things of like this building saved 30% energy. And it's more about encouraging experiential connections with those elements. So we have a sign on the FSC certified wood that encourages you to actually approach it, touch it, smell it, feel it. The all electric fireplace, encourage people to reach in. So I'm really interested in how we foster those kinds of connections, especially in buildings that are public or that interface with a diverse set of users including kids and older people, people with English as a second language. So all these different ways that we can tell those stories so that when people go to a building with a green roof, they're not just staring at the pretty green roof, but they have some guide to what the green roof is actually doing. And whether that's through an animation that you access through a QR code, a kiosk at the building entrance, a subtle sign on the window, just these little ways that we can really give a greater value to all the things we're doing. So they're not just in our world, but everybody's able to appreciate them.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I know in my day to day, I talk with a lot of building professionals. They're working with clients who might prioritize sustainability or differently, I guess, or not find it as important or not be as interested in energy efficiency or reducing energy usage or using low embodied carbon materials. So something I'm always trying to sort of preach is to figure out what is important to them and demonstrate how sustainable green construction can offer those things, things such as, comfort and sound reduction and better indoor air quality, some of the things that might not be as commonly associated with energy efficiency, but that might appeal to a broader audience.
Sure.
The topic of ornamenting architecture is really interesting and one that I've not really learned much about previously. Wondering if you talk a little bit about that, kind of maybe in the context of how you got started working at Yale and what your current role entails.
Those are kind of hard things to marry because I am not really a designer for Yale. While I am a champion for ornament in the work that I do personally and in the teaching I do, I guess I could address those two things separately if that's okay.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Ornament in general, I think it ties to my larger interest. When I came to Yale, one thing I was really interested in, that was when Stephen Keller was still alive and teaching and researching at Yale. For any of you who don't know, he was one of the people who really pioneered the use of the term biophilia as applied to architectural design, and he was a professor in the School of the Environment here at Yale. And so I did some research with him before he unfortunately passed away on his last book on biophilia. And so I was always really interested in sort of that human nature connection and the elements specifically of aesthetics and design that can lead to that. But as a student in the School of Architecture at Yale, I was able to form a really close relationship with Kent Bloomer, who pioneered and taught for 50 years a course on the history and the design of ornament. And so to me, I found a lot of synergies between what I was interested in terms of buildings that really communicate and connect, and this age-old idea of buildings not being smooth boxes, but having some kind of fractal qualities, texture, informational content. And really, over millennia, if you look at buildings in any traditional society, you're going to have ornament, buildings or objects, really, right? You have ornament that's somehow related to what the culture feels about its own place in the world and the other living things, plants, animals, whatever they might be that are important to them. And that's why you see, plant motifs in pretty much every culture, whether you're looking at ancient Mesoamerican culture or Chinese vases. They all have repeating motifs that are used to connect simple, perhaps mundane objects to this larger cosmos that we're all part of. And so I found that really compelling and really interesting, especially when we think about how, again, we tell stories of what sustainable buildings are. How do we incorporate the species that we might be incorporating or benefiting into ornament? How do we, take something as abstract as energy or water consumption and use pattern in a building to illustrate that? So those are just some examples. In my teaching, I've been teaching the last 4 years, not at Harvard, University of Hartford, a little bit less fancy, but in my teaching there, over the last 4 years, and then here at Yale over the last 2 years, really been focusing on arming students with the knowledge of the history of ornamentation as it's existed in architecture for millennia, and then how do we take some of those concepts and apply them to contemporary design. It's really rewarding to see students kind of be able to see the world in that new light. But I'm still figuring out for myself sort of what that means now that I am in a role where rather than designing, I'm really guiding and setting standards for the university. I think there's a lot of opportunity there that I'm excited to dig into. So that's your first question. Your second question was more about my role at Yale now. Is that right?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that next. That sounds great.
Sure. So I'm the associate university architect for sustainability at Yale, and this is a new position that is part of the reorganization of how Yale delivers capital projects. In the last year and a half, Yale's basically created this Office of the University Architect as a entity that gives more direction and vision to how Yale plans out its building and construction plans for the future. So in the past, there wasn't necessarily a group of people who gave that guiding vision and that supervised everything that was happening on campus. And so now this is an incredible opportunity to really think about how do we take Yale's larger mission and goals. Yale's set a lot of very ambitious goals, including carbon neutrality by 2035, trying to use a lot of the research that we are generating and incorporate that into our building projects, getting to truly healthy spaces, getting to low embodied carbon. So how do we take these high level visions that have support from the president and the provost and everybody sort of at the top and trickle them down through the way that we deliver capital projects, which is often very time and budget constrained. And so that's kind of my directive is to figure out how we support all the projects that are getting delivered, how we track them, and how we set standards across the university for all of the design consultants that we employ to follow to deliver the best buildings that we can.
Did you always envision yourself in this sort of role, or did your path evolve over time?
I was an architect in an architecture firm up until a few months ago, so not necessarily, no. I mean, I've always been interested, as you can tell from the story I told of, or sort of my path through what I've been interested in sort of storytelling and the human aspect of green building. I've always felt like just, making your building more efficient per se was not really the end goal. And so to me, it's natural extension of that to be in this role where my job is to do a lot of storytelling, a lot of human connections, a lot of connections of people to resources and people to each other. So I really enjoy that part of it. I think as someone who enjoys also designing and drawing, getting things built, adjusting to being part of a large institution with complex and long-term processes is definitely different. You have to be willing to work at a very different time scale. But on the other hand, the amount of impact that, all of Yale can have, not just in terms of our procurement of materials, like if we tomorrow say we're only going to do low carbon concrete, which, well, technically we do have a low carbon concrete standard already, but if we were to be more ambitious than that, that would change the Connecticut concrete sourcing landscape just because of the sheer volume of concrete that we are putting in with all our construction projects. So the ability to affect change on a big scale and then to be a model for other institutions and universities to follow, I think is really attractive. And that's part of what really drew me to this role is I've always felt like I want to have a broader impact than just building by building. So, ask me in a few years.
Constantly evolving. Yeah, absolutely, as these things do. That's really awesome, though. Yeah, I didn't realize, I guess, the impact and the influence that university and institutions such as Yale has in their decision making. Definitely a powerful sort of example to set. That's fantastic to hear. Curious, now speaking kind of to any of the emerging professionals, but are there any educational moments or in your background or specific trainings, skills you've acquired over the years that really help prepare you for a career in sustainability?
Specifically, I think what's interesting about architecture school is that it doesn't really prepare you very well for all the technical aspects of, well, the profession at large, but more specifically, sustainable design. You get sort of these beautiful high level ideas about, reducing embodied carbon and green buildings, but so much of sustainability is about the fine print. And, if you're doing a LEED certified building, as you all on the call, I'm sure know, it's a lot of legwork and a lot of documentation and a lot of knowing how to, organize all of your information according to a set of, some might say arbitrary. I would say necessarily, you have to put a stick in the ground somewhere. But knowing those standards, like understanding what is ASHRAE 90.1 Appendix G, like how do we measure embodied carbon? What is the CLF baseline? Like all these things you don't learn in school. And so I think if I were to give advice to an emerging professional, it would really be to find opportunities to immerse yourself in some of that technical information, because I think it really is important to being a literate designer and sustainability professional. And yet it's not something you're going to get unless you seek it out. I'm not aware of architecture education programs that truly embrace arming all of their graduates with that information. And yet it's very essential. And it's interesting to me now because I used to be in the position of sustainability coordinator at Centerburg Architects. And so I had to be the person who would support our project teams when we were going after a project and to present things like that, our expertise to a client. And now I'm on the receiving end of that, where we have dozens of architects working for Yale who are all presenting that information back to us. And so I get to see, all the teams that are doing this in all their different ways, some of whom have incredible expertise and some of whom are kind of winging it. And it's always interesting to be able to discern that. So, you're never going to know everything, but I think immersing yourself, in the basics of what those standards are. What is LEED? What are the certification systems? What are various disclosures and standards is really, really helpful. I will also say, though I've never had the fortune to actually work on a passive house certified project, being a certified passive house consultant, just going through the process of that is a fantastic education. And I think everybody in the green building world should do it because everything that you learn about good envelope design and system efficiencies, it's applicable to every project, whether it's passive house or not.
Absolutely. And that was really a great answer. You've answered a few of my questions there. But yeah, I think passive house knowledge really at its core is just good building
It is.
practice.
Yeah.
Things like air control, vapor control, water control, things that every
Mhm.
project aims to implement effectively. But I guess there's a lot of controversy and debate about how to do so most effectively. I feel like Passive House specifically really sort of breaks it down to its root elements and provides a very practical knowledge in that sense.
Definitely. I think a lot of it's just the concepts, right? Like you may not remember the exact air tightness standard for FIAS, but you will remember how to get there and what the testing means are and what the basic requirements are and what the inputs are into the software. So I just think conceptually it's a great education for anybody.
Absolutely. And you mentioned sort of this higher level technical knowledge that maybe architecture education doesn't provide you with as a graduate. And you also mentioned Passive House and certifying as a Passive House professional as one avenue to building expertise. Wondering if you could maybe recommend any other skills or certifications you'd recommend for those just starting out in their professional journey.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has different opinions about lead, which is, it's always easy to hate on something that's successful. So, but it is kind of the industry standard, and I think a lot of other ideas and reactions, including Living Building Challenge, they're based on either the pitfalls or flaws of lead. So it's good to know what lead is and how it works. So to that end, I think anybody who's starting out should absolutely go for the lead GA and hopefully AP as well. I think there also are really great peer groups, especially if you're in an architecture firm that you can find. Building Green, which used to be, a larger website and news thing, but now has split up into a bunch of things. So I think now they have a sub, or I think it's actually an independent company now called Green Commons. But they have a fantastic set of peer networks for architects, engineers. Sadly, I can't be part of it anymore because now I'm a client. But over the 6 years that I was at Centerbrook, it was an invaluable resource for me because I was able to see what other firms were doing, sort of what the latest and greatest was on different rating systems and webinars, information. I'm really sad Building Green is no longer really producing content at the rate it used to because that was just also an invaluable resource. But still, the kinds of networks that developed through that I think are really great. And if anyone can find sort of, I mean, obviously, BuildGreenCT is a great example of that at the local level, but it's often great to find, what is your role and is there a network of professionals of that type across the country that you could reference? So now that I'm in higher ed, there's networks of people in Office of Sustainability across the country, and now that's the people I turn to when I have a question. But when I was in practice, it was really Sustainable Design Leaders Network that was my group of people that I would, see at every conference and interface with online throughout the year. I think it's really important to find that, and that's where you'll find a lot of mentorship opportunities too.
Absolutely great advice. Thank you. I just want to open it up to the group at this point. We have about 10 more minutes or so and see if there are any questions that you guys have for Misha. See Peter leaning in. Hi,
Yeah, I
Peter.
was just going to tell Misha that I was a trustee at the Greenwich Country Day School.
Ah,
And when I first started working with them, they said, "Hey, can you help us do solar?" Because I'd done solar at a previous school
hmm
that I'd been a trustee of. And so I helped them, put up about a megawatt now of solar. But we also, as part of my journey as a trustee, we bought a high school. And I was part of the committee that was interviewing architects, and we hired Centerbrook because the founder not only lives in Greenwich, but he was also a Country Day grad.
yeah, Jeff
Um,
Riley.
so anyway, yeah. So that's just sort of saying that some people do care. I've also worked with the town of Greenwich, advising them on energy efficiency and renewables. Finding firms that really understand passive house and net zero is not as easy as it sounds in Connecticut. TSKP is really kind of the main firm that does that work. So it'd be great if other firms would step up and get with the program, honestly, as well as the construction firms, the big construction firms. So just a comment.
No, and I think it's something I see quite a bit now that I'm on the client side is some firms are fantastic and have great in-house resources, and some firms need more hand-holding, and it's not necessarily consistent. And so going forward, as I get more involved in RFPs and selection, I think we have to think at Yale about what are our minimum standards for hiring firms. And I hope that things like having some passive house building expertise will be important for some of the more ambitious projects in the future.
Thanks, Peter. Any other questions here from our audience? Sarah?
I, of course, love passive house, which most people here already know. But I want to agree with you, Misha and Jeremy, that after taking those trainings for passive house, I mean, not only do you just apply that all the time, but I sort of couldn't live with myself if I didn't apply those building techniques to any project, whether or not it's passive house.
Yeah.
And I think the same could be said for LEED and living building and well and all those other things. I mean, whether or not you actually go for certification, you still have that knowledge and do the best you can whenever you can.
For sure.
And I also wanted to say, I think it's interesting to hear you talk about your work with ornamentation, which is wonderful, but also talk about, how a lot of sustainable measures you don't see that are important. I mean, whether it's, the type of wood, the FSC wood you're using, or using a rubber base instead of vinyl base, or whether you're using, glass pozzolan in your concrete to make it more sustainable. I mean, there's so much sustainable work that nobody sees that's really important. So those are two very interesting ends of the spectrum.
Yes,
You've got
for sure.
ornamentation inspiring people because they see it and they want to touch it. But nobody really gets excited about concrete foundations, but they're really important.
But you could put some kind of cool pattern into your concrete foundations that
nice.
might inspire people to look at them and thereby
Absolutely.
discover
that's
sustainable features.
That's fun.
So.
Yeah.
Sarah, I would point out that in some ways, the best architecture as it relates to sustainability is what you don't see, right? And that's, in my opinion, in my experience, people think passive house and net zero is all weird stuff and newfangled, and it's going to look weird and it's going to be bad. And so if they can't tell, we have solar panels at Country Day School. Most people don't even know that they're up. They're on most of the buildings. They just don't notice them. So they blend into the background. Anyway, I think that, yes, unfortunately for sustainability architects, it's probably like, I made this amazing building and nobody knows that it's there, right? They don't know the details. They don't appreciate them. And maybe that's just the way it ought to be. But
yeah, I mean, I would say it's a challenge here at Yale because of how strict our signage rules are. But on the other hand, we also have an educational mission, which is to get this new generation of leaders who are being trained at Yale to adopt this ethos of sustainability. I think that's an important mission for the Office of Sustainability and for the larger institution. And so, buildings need to tell their story too. Otherwise, they're not really playing a part in the pedagogical role of the campus. And I could see how for different institutions that could be different.
Yeah, especially for a campus that's so historic too. I mean, that's a whole different element.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I will say, for example, the Living Village that's being built at the Yale Divinity School, they made a pretty concerted effort to have a window into their mechanical room, to have, visibility and skylights and dashboards so that some of that story is being broadcast. But part of that too is, living buildings do have a requirement for education, which I think is great. All green building certifications should.
Totally agree. Yeah, it's a really interesting intersection. I know sometimes it's hard to get architects to become interested in things that ultimately will be concealed once the project is complete, and to spend time and resources developing and understanding those things, instead of just sort of leaving them to the builder's discretion. So I guess finding a way to bring that into greater prominence on a job and bring more attention to it is definitely critical. So maybe just one more question and then we can wrap things up, Misha. Are there any, I guess, like emerging trends or technologies or any personal projects, goals, or dreams on the horizon that you're especially excited about and might want to talk about before we wrap our meeting?
Well, I think one thing that is on everybody's mind is Lead V5, which is already open, and Lead V4 will be closing in the spring. And again, whether or not you think Lead is the solution to all the world's problems, it probably isn't, but it is sort of an industry standard. And so there's a lot of changes in V5 that I think are going to be important for anybody in the green building world to adjust to, be able to speak coherently to clients about, and ultimately to implement. So I know, here at Yale, there's a lot of questions around how we're going to adopt V5 and bring it into our building standards. There's also a lot of excitement about the steps forward that it's taking. I think most of them are in the right direction. We could argue about whether they're ambitious enough, but I do think that's something to track. And in general, I think there's a number of technologies around electrification and decarbonization that we hope will become more and more cost effective with time. But I know, here we're exploring, more advanced geothermal technologies beyond what's sort of standard practice, looking at deep wells and inclined bores. There's a lot of talk about refrigerants and how we might eventually phase out high GWP refrigerants in favor of maybe even just using carbon or CO2 itself. So I think there's a lot of different trends toward better and better, all electric buildings that are exciting, maybe aren't coming fast enough. And there's all the outlandish technologies that, there's a mini nuclear reactor that University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign is installing on their campus. So I'm always really interested in following those kinds of things too.
Very cool. Yeah, definitely some awesome technology to look out for. It's at least good to see the industry moving in that direction and innovative professionals to be implementing some of these things that we're hearing so much about. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Misha. I'll get back to the audience once more if there's any questions, but otherwise we can wrap it up for today. Thanks again. Appreciate you taking the time to speak with us and forward to connecting sometime in the near future.
Sounds good. Look forward to seeing you all in person at some point soon.
Yes, hopefully at a BuildGreenCT events.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you all.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
Peter.
much, Misha and Jeremy.
Thanks, Sarah.